John Vornholt.
Thank you, Janet, for inviting me down here. It's been great. I actually know people here. I wasn't sure I would. I've been meaning to come to one of your meetings for like ever. Well, anyway, I have a topic to speak on, and everybody has been so sticking to your time clock and your cash sheet, so I feel like I had to jump on into it. But I will tell you, I quit school when I was 20 years old, and I went to Europe. And my first brush with the movies, I spent 3 years in Europe. I lived 6 months in Rome and 3 years in Spain, and I was a stuntman in the movies. So you can ask me about that. If you don't believe me, there's one German movie, West German comedy Western called I, Sheriff. It starred Kuhlenkampf. And if you look that up anywhere, you'll find me listed in the credits. And I could actually do an hour or two on just making movies in Europe. This was in the highlight of the Westerns, okay? This was like when Italian Westerns, spaghetti Westerns, but I was mostly in the Canary Islands working in sauerkraut Westerns, mostly German Westerns. And it is really amazing because they do not use live sound. They didn't use live sound. In fact, a lot of movies they make in Europe, they don't have, there's no sound, there's no boom mic, there's no recording, there's no nothing, because they got actors from 5 different countries, 10 different countries. They're going to dub it into 20 different languages anyway. So even if they have Americans and Italians and Spaniards and everything, it doesn't matter. And it's like silent movies. The director's yelling, yes, run, get the horses. I mean, everybody's running and everybody's yelling. And so anyway, so I did that. And I started to sell some travel articles where I lived in Spain. And I said, all right. And so after 3 years of living in Spain and working in sauerkraut Westerns, I actually worked in a place called Canyon del Aguila in the Canary Islands, which is like old Tucson. We actually had a Western town, and I was the token American there. So I was the only American. I can still do some of the spiel in Swedish. Hela bom, hela hoopna, välkomna till Vilda Western. I used to be the, I'd get up there and massacre everybody's languages in my horrible Ohio accent. And in fact, the Spaniards used to come up to me and they said, you know, that American accent you do is so funny. Gracias. And so anyway, when I moved back to the United States, I spent about a year in Ohio, and then I went to Los Angeles, right? You gotta try it. And if anybody wants to ask me about, should I go to Los Angeles, I was just about the right age, mid-20s, and I went there and I was there for 17 years. And I did all the things that everybody thinks you do in Hollywood, okay? I wrote lots of movie scripts that didn't get made, that got sold. I wrote a lot for animation, like Saturday morning cartoon shows. And that was back in the days where whenever there was a new toy, there had to be 65 episodes of something to go along with it. So we literally, my writing partner and I used to walk down through Deke or some of these, Filmation, and people, producers would run out and grab us and drag us into their offices and say, I got 65 shows of these stupid dinosaurs, or these are dinosaurs who are space travelers. And that show was actually sunk by being the worst animation anybody ever saw anywhere. The heads on the dinosaurs were a different color than their bodies, and only the heads talked. And there's nothing like low-budget animation to write for, I can tell you, because I remember Filmation, I was writing for He-Man and She-Ra. Remember those shows? And I said, wow, I think we ought to have a horse race. And a horse race? Do you know we can't animate all those legs? Our horses are standing still. People are sitting on them, and they're having a conversation, but they're not moving. That's just too much. And they had the funniest poster I ever saw anywhere. If you remember He-Man, how many remember He-Man? Okay. They had a picture, they had a big, about this size, and there's all these little different pictures of He-Man, always with the same stoic expression. And under the He-Man angry, He-Man pensive, He-Man thoughtful, He-Man in love, He-Man, and they were all the same expression, because that was the only expression He-Man had. All right, let me bring you up to date here. I also wrote for the Hollywood Reporter for many years. I wrote for the Hollywood Reporter. I wrote feature articles on the animation business. I wrote feature articles on documentaries. If you go back and look in those periods, you wouldn't probably, but It was very interesting because I didn't, working for the Hollywood Reporter, that's all puff pieces. I mean, it's all nice stuff. I mean, never, you know, for the most part, it's all, this movie is being filmed and it's great, and I'm, you know, these people were, some of them really awful people, of course, they're in show business, and you know, you turn them in to make them look like Mother Teresa. Everything they did was wonderful. So I wrote for the Hollywood Reporter a lot. And then I got kind of sidetracked. Well, I got kind of sidetracked. I wrote a couple computer manuals for Simon & Schuster, and that meant pocketbooks that paid me some money, and I gave them a book. Of course, these being computer books, they were obsolete the moment they came out. I hadn't realized that was quite how that business worked. And then when, but what happened was, you should backtrack to about 1988, and Star Trek: The Next Generation had just come on. And I had my agent there in Hollywood also handled some novelists and stuff, and he handled me for nonfiction stuff. And he said, you know, I'm sending in some proposals tomorrow. This was Sunday. I'm sending in some proposals for this new, have you seen the new Star Trek show? And I go, yeah, I've seen it once or twice, whatever. And he said, if you can get me a proposal tonight, I'll send it in with the other ones. And so I went home and I wrote up a proposal for a book called Masks. And it's just, I get kind of ripped off an old science fiction story, and actually it's been used many times where there's a planet where everybody wears masks. And essentially, and actually they ripped it off for a Star Trek: The Next Generation show called Masks. So, of course, I got no money for that since I don't owe anything. And so we sent that in. They sent that in with 20 proposals. And, of course, mine was the only one they bought. And I literally had 2 months to write the 80,000-word book. And so I wrote it. Rules of the genre. I know I'm going to get on topic. But anyway, to make a long story short, within 6 months of sending that in, it was on the New York Times bestseller list. So then I spent 25 years writing books, Star Trek books. Here's one of them. And this is a book I wrote called Cupidity. So this is under the name Caroline Goode, because one of the rules are that men can't write romances. Okay, so if you want to write romances, you have to be. Now, see, I got my notes here. I'm going to jam. I understand. We got to move along here. When we say rules of the genre, I don't mean rules like, you know, the script has to be a certain way or anything like that. And this is really important stuff to remember, because as an audience, when we watch something, we feel like, that's not quite right. That doesn't feel right. That doesn't seem right. What's the matter with this? And it's usually because the writer hasn't obeyed the rules they should have for that genre, or they haven't even obeyed their own rules. When I say a rule that the writer makes for his characters, or it's really usually something that springs some character. Like, I think like a rule we've all heard, and really we're relieved when we hear it, is when like one of the characters says to another, well, we can't go to the police because, well, it doesn't matter what the because is. They're after us, or they think you did it, or they think your friend did it, or, you know, the policeman's a crook, or whatever. It's just that we need to know that they're not going to go to the police, because if they did, this 90-minute movie would be 10 minutes long. And so they're not going to go to the police, so we're going to do something else without the police, whatever it is we're going to do. And so I do appreciate it when I hear things like that, because I know the writer has taken time to think, okay, I got to keep them away from the police. We got to get away from that. And one of the other rules I learned from so long from writing kids' books and kids' stories and animation, and this is a really important rule if you want to write something that appeals to kids, get rid of the parents. Get rid of the parents. Get rid of all adults except weirdo adults, except wacko adults are fine. But any adults who are really in authority, because, and of course Harry Potter is a perfect example of this, because the first thing you do is pluck him away from the mundanes, or the you know, and take him, the muggles, take him from the muggles and stick him in with, you know, the crazy school. So that's really important. And if you look at any kind of kids' books and kids' stories, you have to say to yourself, you know, because the kids want to follow the familiar rules of Socrates and Plato and all the Greek, the formula we have is that essentially for most all of our movies we have the same 3-act formula, and usually it's the protagonist gets himself into the mess, and then the protagonist has to get himself out of the mess. And this is important because in any kind of genre, especially the kids' books, we don't want the parents and the police and everybody riding into to the rescue like the cavalry. And if you look at old westerns, nobody wants to see that cavalry ride up and solve the problem. So, and if you think about every kind of genre does have rules that you really need to create and have your characters follow. And this is an old article I wrote about this subject several years ago, so I'm going to crib a little bit of it. For example, in a mystery novel, yes, there's a mystery to solve, but you generally want to make it hard for the detective. How many in here have seen the movies or read Tony Hillerman books? Tony Hillerman books, and what's great about Tony Hillerman's books, he has these Navajo detectives, right? And what's interesting about them, even though there are murders on the reservation and everything, anytime there's a murder, the FBI takes over. So they're never allowed to actually investigate the murders, which of course makes their job extremely hard. So they have to sneak around behind the scenes, they have to go, they have to do it on the slide. And that's always the case, of course, with umpteen cop shows, where the first thing the cop does is kill too many suspects in the opening scene and gets fired or put on suspension, and you better stay away from that case. Well, now there's a rule right there. There's a great rule right there. You better not go anywhere near, you better stop that. Don't mess around with this case anymore. What do you know he's going to spend the next 2 hours doing? Is going to try to figure out that case and circumvent everybody and try to beat the rules. So you got to set up these rules as best you can. And one of the others, of course, is science fiction. Now, the main rule, there's a great novelist named Jerry Purnell. How many of you heard of Jerry Purnell? He claims there's only 2 stories in science fiction. They come here or we go there. And in fact, if you stop to think about it, there are only 2 rules in science fiction. They come here or we go there. Lately, there have been a lot of they come here movies. And that kind of always works. I don't know why, but they're never friendly when they come. Except for E.T., but even then. But essentially, the other thing, if you're going to do a we go there or we're out in outer space, that's why in the early days of Star Trek and in the early 60s, science fiction was viewed as a direct descendant of the Western, because it bears one major quality with the Western, in that usually we're way out somewhere. Okay, we're out in the middle of the desert, we're out in the middle of the space, we're out on some crazy planet, we're out somewhere where there is no police to call. In fact, Gene Roddenberry famously pitched Star Trek as Wagon Train to the Stars. But it wasn't really Wagon Train to the Stars, that was Battlestar Galactica. But that was Wagon Train to the Stars. But essentially he pitched it as, he also said it's Horatio Hornblower. And if you look back to any kind of seafaring yarn, that's the same thing, is that we're out in a boat in the middle of the Atlantic, and we're fighting with the French or the Spaniards or the Dutch or somebody we're fighting with, and we can't call for help. And that's the main thing in Western science fiction, seafaring stories or anything like that. Once you get out in the middle of nowhere, you're on your own. Whatever problem you come up against, you've got to solve it for yourself. And I think that's a really important quality. All right, let me see what else we got here. Well, spy thrillers. Now, what is the one main rule in spy thrillers? Any Jean Le Carré, anything like that? I'll see. Do I see a hand while I get a drink of water? You can't. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no. Well,
oh no. I know the answer.
The world's in jeopardy.
You know the world. That's a James Bond thing. So I have that bottle from hell here. Okay. Essentially, any spy thriller, Jean Le Carré or anything like that, is you can't trust anybody. That is really the crucial thing of a spy thriller, is your best friend is working for the enemy, or that gorgeous girl you just happen to meet on the subway is working for somebody. I mean, you may turn her because you're a handsome hero, but you know she's going to be untrustworthy. Virtually everybody in a spy thriller is untrustworthy. I'm going to try not to blow up your stuff Let's see. You know, I think if we get to science fiction, of course, you also have to follow, theoretically, in science fiction, scientific principles. I mean, the speed of light is always what it is, except now we think it may be different. And there's certain, and this is easier said than done. I wrote a whole bunch of Dinotopia books. You guys remember Dinotopia? It was a TV show. I wrote a lot of Dinotopia books. In fact, I have worked in everybody else's universe in the world, including sometimes in mine. I'll digress just for a second about rules. This is interesting. Somebody asked me to write, they asked me to write a Spider-Man book. And I thought, oh, I'm going to write my favorite Spider, I'll use my favorite villain, which is the Lizard. Okay, and that's a lizard, but he looks like a guy in a lab coat. But I won't go into how he became the Lizard. That's a long story. But essentially I said, but I don't want my Spider-Man book to be in New York, because I'm tired of Spider-Man is poor and broke in New York. Everybody's poor and broke in New York. That doesn't mean anything. So I said, all right, so I'm going to put him somewhere else. And then the first thing I realized, well, if I put Spider-Man standing out on I-10, he can't stop any crimes at all. He can't do anything. If he's just standing there on a highway, what's he going to do? Shoot a cactus and swing over there? So I realized this is a superhero, but he has to be somewhere with tall stuff. And I mean taller than downtown Tucson. A lot taller than that. And I realized, oh my gosh, he's worthless. Spider-Man is totally worthless out of New York. And this wasn't a rule, but I said, okay. I ended up setting the story down in Copper Canyon, Canyon del Cobre, down in Mexico, which is a lot bigger than the Grand Canyon. But anyway, Spider-Man in a big canyon is just, he's fine, he's good to go. And that was a Chupacabra story too, so I know. He's organizing all the Chupacabras. So anyway, once you get, yeah, and that was kind of like an interesting rule. Sometimes you see they spring from character. And you've got to look at your characters and see what exactly are they about. Like somebody, you were thinking back there when we talked about spy stuff, you were thinking of like James Bond. Well, James Bond has one rule, or has a couple rules. A, he never believes in rules and never follows rules. Anybody else's rules, that's why he has a license to kill. I guess he has a rule. You're allowed to kill people. And that's kind of an unusual rule. But he has a license to kill, and he's able to kill people. But the thing is, he never follows the rules, and when he gets captured, like he does every movie, when he gets captured, he always believes, I can escape. I can still escape. I don't believe anything is going, I just don't believe anything is going to change my willpower. And there are heroes like that. Let me see here. Oh, happy endings. Happy endings, you know, I didn't talk about the horror genre. How many in here do horror? Well, I mean, it's a popular thing with independent filmmakers, obviously. And horror has many, well, it has more rules than anything. Let's face facts, is that in Dracula or any kind of vampire stories, there's more rules than an IRS rule book. I mean, there's more rules than you can shake a stick at. Everybody has to follow all these rules. You can't go out the day, or you get sparkly, or something. And no, I mean, they change them, they tweak them a little bit here and there, but essentially, everybody's got the silver bullets, everybody's got the stakes, everybody's got the garlic, everybody's got the cross. And that's why I love the Roman Polanski movie, The Fearless Vampire Killers, because, you know, there was a Jewish vampire who laughed with a cross. I thought, there we go, see, that filmmaker knows when to break a rule and how to break it and why to break it. So, and happy endings are interesting. And sometimes, of course, we nowadays, one of the great things I like about the horror genre is that the bad guys can win. And that's very rare this day and age, because we don't have too many traditional tragedies like Shakespeare where everybody dies in the end. Okay, normally our hero's going to live to fight another day or love another day. Well, what's interesting about the horror genre is the bad guys occasionally win, especially if you want a sequel, because the bad guys are the continuing factor in the horror genre. Oh, Jamie Lee Curtis can do a lot of a lot of Halloween movies, but essentially the heroes come and go, and the bad guys. But I always hated it because essentially, when you overuse a bad guy, they become like the old movies, the old Universal movies, where Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, and eventually Godzilla becomes really confused. He doesn't know if he's bad or good. He's good some movies, bad some movies. Even Freddy Krueger seemed to have gotten kind of nice somewhere along the lines. I don't know how that happened, but you look at that, and if you use a horror guy too much, he will just eventually go crazy. But there's also the rules we come to expect in movies, and as movie goers, we expect filmmakers to follow the rules we're used to, which again is that old 3-act structure. You guys know that, right? You guys know the 3-act structure. I could give you a quick version if we have time, but essentially, the hero gets into the mess. He goes okay for a while until the villain gets the upper hand, and then it's all downhill. Okay, and we're all used to that, and finally, I look at I used to tell my kids, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers is just like every wrestling thing on TV, okay? Just like a wrestling match, there's always a point where the good guy's on the mat, and they're hitting him with chairs, the girlfriend's out there spiking him with her shoes, and everybody is beating up on him, but eventually he's gonna shake himself up off the floor and get out there and win the game and head toward the climax, which is another great Greek word. And, we're going to be happy ever after. And when these rules are moved around, like Psycho. Now, the movie Psycho, and everybody looks at that movie just that. Everybody looks at the movie Psycho and says, oh, it's the shocking shower scene. Okay, although the shower scene isn't shocking, and it looks like MTV, but I mean, it's like nothing nowadays, but that movie is still shocking. And the reason why that movie is so shocking is because the heroine, Janet Leigh, gets killed exactly halfway through the movie. Okay, and in fact, if she'd gotten killed with a baseball bat, or rats jumping on her, it wouldn't have mattered because the audience is sitting there watching this. Oh, she's decided to take the money she embezzled. She's decided the next day she's going to take the money and go back and turn herself in, and she's going to be good. Well, she's not going to get there, is she? And so what they do is they kill her. Hitchcock and Robert Bloch, who wrote the script, they kill her halfway through the movie. The heroine, nice Janet Leigh. Well, from then on, the audience is like, oh, they just killed the heroine. We have no idea what they're going to do the rest of the movie. We're really in shock then. And that's what you got to look at. If you're going to break a rule, really smash it. Okay, really smash it, because the shock value of it is so important. And I also look at Pulp Fiction as being a movie too that breaks the rules because it tells things out of. Yeah, it's like movies are shot. Well, let's just put it the way we shot it. All right. We'll wonder why they're wearing the little shirts and the little T-shirts. It's a funny scene, and we finally get explanation. And again, I like that movie too because it breaks down our expectations, what we're used to, and it kind of really throws it all out the window. And once you do that, you really have the audience at your mercy. And I think that's an important thing to look at. And but then again, certain things have to end. I always think of The Tale of Two Cities as being, the Sidney and Anthony. That's a famous book, of course, and it's about a guy who, for some reason, looks just like another guy, and takes his place in the guillotine at the end. It's really a stupid story, but it's very touching. It's a far, far better thing I do, and all of that. And it's really one of those stories that cannot have a happy ending, because if you take the place of a condemned man going to the guillotine, you're going to get your head chopped off. That is the rule. Everybody, those other 200 extras got their heads chopped off. You got to get your head chopped off too. And let's see here. Well, I think, and anytime we have the French Revolution, of course, that's always a good thing. I think it's always war stories too. We generally have the rule that it's a war story And it's interesting to me how war stories are often always love stories. Because we have the rule, there are no rules. All the usual things we've been living by in the 1940s or 1917 or whatever, they're all broken down. I mean, you know, I'm in love with you and there may be no tomorrow. And so, you know, the bomb may fall on us right now. And I think that's an important thing to look at. Oh, one of the other rules that are really good for screenwriters, and it took me a long time to realize how good this is the ticking clock. Anytime you're plotting a story and you can put a ticking clock in, and like in that James Bond movie, it's literally a clock ticking on the palm. It doesn't have to be that kind of in your face, but anytime you can, a ticking clock when you're plotting a story will always give you this sense of urgency. I've got to keep going. I can't take a nap. You know, I can't go on a date. I don't even have time to eat. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just running around like crazy. So I think if you can get a ticking clock into your stories, that is always a good idea. And let me see. General stupidity. You know, this gets back to the we can't go to the police because. I mean, you know what? One thing I really hate in movies, and I've seen this more and more lately, and that's that we have this big dramatic car chase, right? And all of a sudden, the good guys, who were getting chased, of course, are sitting in their hotel room. And we have no idea how the heck they ended that, how they got away. Did all the police go to the donut shop at the same time? I don't know. And these cities, and there's lots of cities and movies that just don't have any police. They just don't plain exist. They're just not there at all. And I think it's so easy to try to figure out a way to explain that so it doesn't bug people. I don't know why more writers don't take the chance. Although I got to say, during my 17 years in Hollywood, one of the interesting things to me, all the really good movie scripts I read were optioned, bought, or something, but never made. And the really terrible movie scripts I read were all made. I haven't quite figured that out yet, but one of the things in here. Well, physical rules too. And we've all seen somehow this 100-pound actress drag the 6'6", 250-pound dead guy, seemingly from room to room. And you know that isn't really going to happen. I mean, if she had help and a dolly and I don't know what all, but that bugs me too. And that's a physical rule. Rules of physics, you should try to avoid breaking those. Too horrible. Oh, this is a good one. And that's station in life. Now, we as Americans, despite, obviously, we're not in the same station as Mitt Romney. We really aren't, okay? We don't make $27 million a year just for doing nothing, just for running for president. Okay, that doesn't happen to anybody probably in this room. And we'd all like to think, my station in life doesn't matter. I can go anywhere I want. I can do anything I want. Well, if you were Steven Spielberg's son, it would be easier, okay? The whole film business thing would be easier, I need to tell you. And of course, if you live in Hollywood for any time, you do see a lot of nepotism there. But you have to think about station in life, even in, of course, if you're doing upstairs, downstairs, about the English house with the maids and everybody having their station in life are very set. But even in our own world, even in what we think of as our own modern world, there are stations in life. I mean, people have, for example, police can do a lot of things you can't do and I can't do. And just certain things can, rich people can do things that we can't do. Poor people can do things that we can't do. There's just all kind of different stations in life. And I think as a writer, you have to look at those and realize, okay, I got to be true to this. And surmounting your station in life is often a really good story. That really is. And it's often, we look at all kind of documentaries and things, and even the poorest people. I mean, look at Rocky. Rocky is about surmounting your station in life because he was this club fighter who really, you know, had no chance at the big time, had no chance to do anything, and then by some strange fluke, which I still don't understand, he got to fight for the heavyweight championship. But that's a Cinderella story. In fact, every Cinderella story is a station in life story, which I think is kind of interesting. All right. You know, and I often equate this to having, your characters are your children, okay? And if you raised any children, you know children have to have rules too. And your characters are the rules, even if they seemingly make up the rules themselves, like, oh, we can't call the police because my dad's the police chief, I don't know, or something like that, or I'm screwing the police chief's daughter, or whatever reason it is. These are all rules your parents, or as parents, we give our kids rules. And I think you have to realize you have to give your characters rules too, or at least make them come to the realization, this is what I have to do, and this is why I have to do it. Okay, let's see if I got anything else. You know, it's funny, I am a great mystery fan, and I do like mysteries. And it took me a long time to figure out how writers cheat. And writers can cheat. And anybody in here read Agatha Christie mysteries? Or you've seen Agatha Christie movies and all that? And it took me a long time. I was reading Agatha, when I was living in Spain, in fact, and working as a stuntman, the only English books you could get were Agatha Christie books. So I read all these Agatha Christie books, and it took me forever to realize, you know what? She cheats. She cheats a lot, and what she does is she puts you in the point of view of, she puts you in the mind of the murderer. Now, normally, I know this is a, you guys are filmmakers and not book writers, but generally speaking, the rules still hold. You don't want to spend too much time with your nasty villain, because you don't really care what he had for breakfast. You don't want to really see him. I mean, you really want to keep hands off. Right? You don't want to be inside his mind. You certainly don't want to see him planning what he's going to do, because that would spoil all the suspense. So generally speaking, you're not in the point of view ever of the villain, the antagonist. You're always in the point of view of your heroes. Of course, in Agatha Christie book, there's multiple people, lots of people in it. And what I didn't realize this, finally I realized she had a nice little she always has a young love thing in her books, okay? And and she had this one nice young man thinking, oh, I'd really like to ask her out, but she's below my station, or I'm above her station, or whatever it was, he couldn't do it. But then I realized he turned out to be the cold-blooded murderer. And I didn't think it was him because we were in his mind. So she faked this out. But of course, she wasn't in his mind when he was thinking, I'll have to murder that guy tonight. Okay, I'll have to get the ice pick and just ram it right through his temple with my sledgehammer. We didn't see him thinking that. We saw him thinking nice, innocuous thoughts. And this is also, I think you can do this when you're trying to do a mystery, is take your character, who you really know is the murderer, but you're trying to throw everybody off, and just show him making coffee, show him doing something nice, show him petting a puppy. You know, there used to be when we were doing westerns, when I was doing westerns, and even this is an old phrase, that there's the dog kicking heavy. And the dog kicking heavy was the guy who was the bad guy in the gang, who had no lines, or very few lines. So he would always be in the background trying to find a dog to kick, just so you could show how bad he was. Well, you can do the reverse of that too, and take your bad guys and show them doing little nice things along the way. And I'm doing okay. About time for questions, maybe. You guys got any questions? I've written everything with words in it, and right now I'm doing a lot of theater. I have a group of actors at the Beowulf Valley Theater, and we do children's theater. Our next show opens on March 17th, called Rabbit Hood, which is a Robin Hood takeoff. We're having Easter egg hunt. And I had a Christmas show called Cactus Christmas run there in December. And so it's interesting because I set out to do Hollywood and be a screenwriter and a playwright, and then I waylaid for 25 years writing books. And I was on the Enterprise for 30 books. Okay, so yes.
I don't think I caught how you actually went from being a stuntman in German westerns to being an author. Right.
Well, you know, how did I do that? All right, I was a stuntman, as many of you probably know. A stuntman is a gig for a young guy or a young woman, all right? It's not a gig for anybody over about, oh, there are stunt coordinators over the age of 25 and 30, but if you're really going to do stunts, you probably want to be about under 30, okay, because things can go wrong. You got to be able to heal up, all right? And in fact, I fell off a horse at a full gallop every day for 2.5 years. So I've fallen off a horse thousands of times. And the whole trick to falling off a horse, in case you ever need to know this, is you have to find a horse that will keep going. Now, this sounds easy, but it's not. Because most horses, you're on their back, and, oh, that guy just fell off. I'm done. my work here is finished. Whereas that looks terrible on screen, and that's why you never see it on screen. The guy falls off the horse, stands there looking at him. That's an idiot. You cannot have that. So you got to have a horse that will just keep running lickety-split. And also, what you need to do is, and it needs to be going fast because you need to hit the ground on like the toes of your feet or your boots and your padded elbows, and hit the ground and roll, and make it a slight glance. And if you ever look at old westerns, you'll always notice the streets are full of sand, deep sand, deep sand. In fact, if you ever see anybody fall on a horse or anything, you see usually the ground has been prepared very nicely. So anyway, that's still to answer your question. But I started to write travel articles about the places I was living and the places I'd been to. And I started selling them. I said, oh, well, I'm a writer. I'm going to go back and be a writer now and stop falling off horses for a living. And so I went back, and as I say, I did Hollywood. Oh, I spent a year being a full-time extra in Hollywood too. I could regale you all night with stories about that. And that was kind of a strange. That's an okay business, especially if you're a bit older. If you ever go to Hollywood and say, okay, I want to try to make a living here doing something and get on a film set, being an extra is a very good gig. But unfortunately, as you guys all make films and you know this is the truth, when you show up in the morning, you don't know if you'll be there an hour or 14 hours. I mean, you cannot have a life. You just don't, and of course, they don't tell the extras anything. And these are extras they're paying too, so we're paying them, don't tell them anything at all. So you really have got to just forfeit having a life if you want to do that. But that is a good way to try to make it to Hollywood. And so as I say, I just kind of went there, and I've been very lucky in that I never found it hard to make a living writing. Okay, well, some years it's been less than others, of course, but I really, the last full-time job I had was 1982 when I worked for Texas Instruments, and I was writing, producing, and starring in training videos. So that is the very last actual job I had. So ever since then, I've been a full-time writer. But when you got to say, when you want to be a full-time make-money writer, you got to, stop working for free. So all you guys who want a free script from me, I'm sorry. But anyway, but you got to stop working for free, and you got to take whatever comes along. And that's why, you know, the animated cartoons, although that was really crazy work most of the time. Did you have a question?
Well, kind of along with that, what you're talking about, you started off saying that you dropped out of school when you were 20. So that's not really like 18 out of high school, or so were you in college? Or
Yeah, I quit after a year of college. I wanted to be in the movies.
Right, okay.
I wanted to be in the movies right now.
Right.
And I didn't think anything I was learning here. I would not have traded my almost 4 years in Europe for the 4 years in college.
And on top of that, I was just going to say one real quick. What do you think about every time somebody's running from someone who's after them, they always fall down? That's
Oh, and it's always the klutzy girl. Why isn't it the big, strong, muscular guy with the machine gun who falls over the root? That never happened. Well, you know, it was famously Charlie Chaplin who said a long time ago, must every movie end in a chase? And that's one of my favorite quotes. And yeah, Charlie, every movie has to end in a chase. I'm sorry. That's the way it is. But it does seem that way sometimes, though. But that is one of my favorite quotes. Must every movie end in a chase? Yes, Eric.
What is your very favorite, if you have one, genre to write for?
I really am prone to fantasy and science fiction. And only because you can do, and it's interesting to me how in the book business, fantasy has much supplanted science fiction. There isn't that much science fiction anymore, hardcore science fiction. In the movie business, it's just the, you know, kind of, well, I mean, it's hard to say what's fantasy and what's science fiction. Science fiction is still considered to be kind of an action genre. You know, and so is fantasy, and I've got nothing wrong with that. Really, it's interesting that I wrote so many books that are movie and TV tie-ins, and I was kind of perfectly situated to do that because I had been working in Hollywood, and I'd been in those crazy meetings, one after another, where they take a good script and completely destroy it. You know, and I'd been there and seen that done, and so I was very, I was a good one for them to take in. I wrote Alice Mack books, Sabrina the Teenage Witch books. I guess I've written books in so many other people's universes. I should have a passport, but I really do tend to go toward fantasy and science fiction and left to my own devices. Yes.
In any movie, there's people involved in the production. The producer, the director, the editor, and the screenwriter. How do you do to really keep the essence from your script when you finally need to involve many people?
Well, that is a
thinking different
really...
ways. The producer expects something. The editor will interpret what the director is shooting this way, and the screenwriter tries to explain the story in complement with the director. How do you find the key to really
hold on to your script? It's almost impossible because they don't really want writers around at all. Now, one of my favorite other quotes from my years in Hollywood, this producer, I told him I wanted to direct. Like me and 400,000, he said, you don't want to direct. He said, that's the brother-in-law goes down and opens up the shop in the morning. And many producers do feel that is the brother-in-law, the son-in-law, the guy who can't get a producing job, who has to go down and open up the store in the morning, has to be down there before everybody else and leave after everybody else. Most producers consider directors to be
I made that question because the same happened between the director and editor. Sometimes the editor will destroy a little discouraged.
You have to pick your battles.
The same happened with the screenwriter?
Yes, but screenwriters are like architects. Screenwriters are like architects who are going to design a building, all right? But generally, everybody considers their job to be mostly done by the time we start to build the building. And unless you're a very well-connected screenwriter, or unless you've got some other function on the movie, you're not even going to be around when they're making the movie. Yeah.
Do you ever get involved in something where there are 6 or 8 or 10 writers, and how that environment felt?
Yes, I have been. And you're sitting around a great big table. I've written things with that many people in a room, and there's a poor secretary in the corner who's the fastest typist in the world, who literally types down everything everybody says. And then somebody goes through later on and tries to figure out what the good parts are that we can keep.
Based on your educational history of quitting after 1 year,
Yes.
would you say that formal education in this field would be a detriment to the writing skills? Or, I mean, let's put it another way, can anybody in essence that has creative fantasy become a writer?
Well, the thing is,
from,
nobody asks you, where did you graduate? Unless you graduate from USC. Unless you graduate from USC, it isn't really worth that much. If you graduate from USC, that carries some cachet. But I'm a film student at U of A. Oh, okay, you know, we got 40,000, screenwriters from colleges in our USC sitting out there.
So a lack of education shouldn't hold something back.
Of course, you can learn things in school. I mean, I'm not saying you'll never learn anything in school, but the fact is, it's not like getting a regular job where people are going to ask you, what are your academic credentials? I mean, so
So it would encourage us that didn't go to writing school to actually...
Yeah, I never went to writing school either, and I published 60-some books. So I always think the best learning thing is to do it. Writers are people who write, Filmmakers are people who make films. People who only talk about it are not. Okay, the people who talk about writing and talk about making films are not writers, or they're just people talking about it. Yes.
Told us your favorite genre, and you've done it all, so what would you say is your favorite form to write in?
I love old-time radio. I love radio drama. And even now I do I'm in old-time radio drama, and in fact, I got my Writers Guild of America card during the mid-1970s, during the Renaissance of radio drama. There was the Mystery, CBS Mystery Theater. There was the Mutual Radio Theater, the Sears Radio Theater. I wrote for both of those. I wrote dozens of radio shows. And radio scripts are a writer's dream. Because you don't have to build any sets. You don't have to build any sets anywhere. And if you want to have 400 planets or 400 spaceships, you just got to make people believe it. You just got to describe it. So, but you still have great actors. You still have sound effects and music. You've got all the cool stuff without any of the expense or none of the locations. I used to go into Glen Sound and Paramount, which is to watch my radio shows. They would bring you in case they had to make a cut. And there would be Marvin Miller, who was the millionaire. Any of you older folks remember him. And John Daner, Parley Bear, Dawes Butler, who played Huckleberry Hound, June Foray, who was June Foray. I mean, all these great voice talents sitting around there. And June Foray could play. She could play an 80-year-old woman, an 18-year-old woman, a 4-year-old boy. She could play a squirrel. She could play anything. And you look around these actors, and they take your script around this table. They'd read through it once, and they would be letter perfect. That was just a thrill. And then you'd watch this. I'd be able to watch the Foley guys doing the footsteps and doing all the thing. I mean, to really radio drama. If I was only born 50 years earlier, I'd still be doing that, because I really do love that. Am I done? I'm done. All right.